el problema mente-cerebro, y hay una teoría sobre la conciencia que es tan rematadamente absurda que no entiendo por qué algunos la defienden. En este vídeo te cuento a qué teoría me refiero, por qué podemos decir prácticamente con seguridad que es falsa y cuál es, en mi opinión, el principal obstáculo que impide a tantas personas ir más allá. Y no te preocupes, te lo voy a contar bien facilito para que lo entiendas y luego vayas, pues, no sé, a impresionar a tu crush o algo. Soy Enric, bienvenido de vuelta a Adictos a la Filosofía. Vayamos al grano. ¿A qué teoría me refiero? A una que tiene el nombre complicado de pronunciar de epifenomenalismo.
¿Quién le puso este nombre? Para darle un premio. En collejas.
El epifenomenalismo es la tesis de que la mente o la conciencia, la dimensión subjetiva de la experiencia, está enteramente producida por el cerebro, pero que de por sí no tiene ninguna influencia causal sobre la realidad. Dicho de otra manera, la mente es siempre solo efecto y nunca causa. Lo mental es un epifenómeno de los procesos cerebrales, un efecto secundario suyo que no tiene de vuelta ninguna eficacia causal. Si te está costando entenderlo, piensa en esta analogía. Imagínate una locomotora de vapor. ¿Qué es lo que hace que se mueva? Pues todos los procesos materiales, físicos, químicos que tienen lugar dentro de la caldera, donde arde el carbón. Todo eso es lo que hace que las ruedas se muevan, ¿verdad? Pero todos esos procesos también producen el humo que sale por la chimenea. ¿El humo hace que la locomotora se mueva? No, el humo es un efecto secundario de todos esos procesos, pero en sí mismo no hace que la locomotora se mueva. No tiene un efecto sobre ella, es un epifenómeno. Pues la conciencia, según esta teoría, es como el vapor de la locomotora, algo producido como efecto secundario por los procesos cerebrales que son los verdaderos causantes del movimiento de tu cuerpo, pero que no tiene de por sí ninguna influencia de vuelta en tu comportamiento. Tú, como sujeto consciente, estás atrapado en una especie de teatro interior, y nada de lo que experimentas tiene un efecto real en el mundo. Fíjate en que se trata de una teoría muy radical porque choca frontalmente con la imagen natural y espontánea que todos tenemos acerca de nosotros mismos. Ordinariamente pensamos que nos movemos en base a ciertas razones, que nuestras experiencias impactan profundamente nuestro comportamiento. No se comporta igual la persona que está alegre que la que está sufriendo. Voy al botiquín a tomarme una aspirina porque sentía dolor de cabeza, por ejemplo. Sonrío porque estoy contento. Me preparo la cena porque tengo hambre. Pero para el epifenomenalista todo eso es una ilusión. En realidad, tu experiencia consciente, las cosas que sientes, no hacen nada. Tus sensaciones, percepciones, sentimientos, pensamientos, recuerdos, decisiones, todo eso es como una película que va rodando en tu cabeza mientras tu cuerpo se mueve solo de modo mecánico al margen completamente de lo que sentimos, pensamos y queremos. Si pudiéramos de algún modo apagar esa película interior, eso no afectaría en nada al movimiento de tu cuerpo, a tu comportamiento. Seguirías haciendo exactamente las mismas cosas, seguirías gritando cuando te pegan, aunque en realidad no te dolería nada. Lo que hacemos nunca está influenciado por lo que experimentamos subjetivamente, sino solo por los procesos electroquímicos que se dan dentro de tu cráneo. Somos, en otras palabras, autómatas conscientes. Varios filósofos de renombre han defendido esta teoría a pesar de su radicalidad. Por ejemplo, David Chalmers en The Conscious Mind o Frank Jackson durante un tiempo. Pero ¿es acaso verdad? ¿Se reduce realmente la conciencia a ser un epifenómeno? Te voy a dar en este vídeo 5 motivos para pensar que no. Primero, el epifenomenalismo parece claramente falso. Que mi vida mental tiene un efecto sobre mi comportamiento es tan evidente como que hay una realidad exterior. Por ejemplo, sé en mis carnes que sentir dolor me lleva a comportarme de una manera determinada. Tiene un efecto en mí, me lleva a querer evitar ese dolor todo lo posible. Estar triste me hace llorar, acordarme de que me he dejado la cartera en casa me hace dar la vuelta en mitad de la calle, concentrarme me hace entender mejor lo que estoy leyendo.
Leer a Hegel te dio un mareo el otro día.
Claro que el epifenomenalista siempre puede decir que todo eso es una ilusión, que nos parece que la experiencia subjetiva tiene un efecto sobre el mundo y nuestro comportamiento, cuando en realidad no es así. Pero eso lo puede decir cualquiera, también lo puede decir el que piensa que vivimos en una simulación, en Matrix, o el que dice que no existen personas aparte de él mismo, o que Mark Zuckerberg es un reptiliano. Nos parece que existe una realidad extramental objetiva, nos parece que existen otras personas, nos parece que Mark Zuckerberg es un ser humano, pero todas todas esas apariencias son falsas, ilusorias. ¿Te tomarías en serio estas sugerencias sin más? Sospecho que no, que querrías que te demostraran todas esas cosas más allá de una duda razonable. Y harías bien, porque esa es la manera racional de proceder en estas cosas, confiando en que las cosas son como nos parece que son, a menos que tengamos buenos motivos para pensar lo contrario. Ahora, si nos parece tan evidente que nuestro comportamiento está influido por nuestra vida mental, pues el que tiene la carga de la prueba de demostrar que esto no es así, es el que piensa que todo eso es una ilusión. Pero el epifenomenalista, como veremos al final, no tiene en realidad buenos motivos para pensar que lo mental no tiene eficacia causal. Y por tanto tenemos que quedarnos con lo que nos parece más inmediatamente evidente: que la mente no es un mero epifenómeno. Al fin y al cabo, lo mismo decía Hume sobre la causalidad en general, que a nosotros nos parece que la primera bola de billar mueve a la segunda, pero que en realidad eso es una ilusión generada por la fuerza de la costumbre. Pero el epifenomenalista quiere afirmar que sí hay causalidad, porque como mínimo el cerebro produce la mente. Ahora bien, los motivos que tenemos para pensar que el cerebro tiene un efecto sobre la experiencia subjetiva son los mismos que existen también para pensar que la mente tiene eficacia causal. Por ejemplo, encontramos correlaciones o sucesión entre eventos cerebrales y eventos mentales, por tanto postulamos que los primeros producen los segundos. Pero también encontramos correlaciones o sucesión entre ciertos estados o fenómenos mentales y nuestro comportamiento. De nuevo me pongo a hacer la cena porque siento hambre. Huyo del oso porque lo veo, lo percibo y de pronto siento mucho miedo. Si la correlación y sucesión eran suficientes para afirmar la causalidad del cerebro a la mente, pues tendrían que ser suficientes también para afirmar la causalidad de la mente al comportamiento o al movimiento corporal. Y ojo, importante, aquí el epifenomenalista no puede responder que es incomprensible cómo la mente en sí es algo no físico podría llegar a tener un efecto sobre las partículas del cerebro, por ejemplo. Porque a día de hoy también es incomprensible y misterioso cómo meras reacciones electroquímicas entre neuronas pueden llegar a tener un efecto sobre la experiencia subjetiva. Y a pesar de esto, el epifenomenalista afirma sin problema que sí hay esa relación causal. Y tiene cierta razón, porque en general, para afirmar que una cierta cosa causa otra, no necesitamos entender cómo lo hace. Por tanto, si todo apunta a que la mente tiene efectivamente un efecto, una influencia sobre lo que hacemos, sobre nuestro comportamiento, y no hay ningún buen motivo para pensar que estamos siendo sistemáticamente engañados acerca de su eficacia, pues entonces tenemos que pensar que el epifenomenalismo es falso. Segundo, el epifenomenalismo se enfrenta también a un problema con la teoría de la evolución. Este segundo argumento se ha formulado de diversas maneras y hay unas que son más persuasivas que otras. Por ejemplo, el filósofo de la ciencia Karl Popper escribió en su artículo Natural Selection and the Emergence of Mind que si la mente es un epifenómeno, entonces lo que importa para que un organismo se comporte de manera adaptativa, de manera que favorezca a su supervivencia y reproducción, son las reacciones electroquímicas que se dan en su cerebro, pero no su experiencia subjetiva. Mientras su cerebro le haga alejarse de los depredadores y acercarse a las hembras, pues por poder podría estar teniendo la experiencia subjetiva de estar viendo un vídeo de filosofía en YouTube. Eso no cambiaría para nada el resultado si la mente es realmente un epifenómeno y no tiene eficacia causal. Pero entonces, escribía Popper, si el epifenomenalismo fuera verdad, la mente no habría podido surgir por evolución, porque habría sido algo inútil de cara a la supervivencia y reproducción de los organismos. El problema de esta forma de argumento es que la evolución sí que ha dado lugar a multitud de rasgos y propiedades que son inútiles para un organismo desde un punto de vista evolutivo. Por ejemplo, los osos polares tienen una piel muy gruesa y pesada. Que sea gruesa sí es algo útil para la supervivencia en su hábitat, porque les permite retener mucho mejor el calor. Pero que sea pesada es algo inútil o incluso un poquito perjudicial porque les hace ser más lentos. Lo que pasa es que tener la piel pesada es un efecto secundario de tener la piel gruesa. Por tanto, como tener la piel gruesa es evolutivamente útil y que sea pesada es un efecto concomitante de su grosor, la evolución seleccionará a aquellos osos con la piel más pesada, por mucho que considerado en sí mismo tener la piel pesada sea algo inútil. Y esto es similar a lo que el epifenomenalista sugiere que pasó evolutivamente con la conciencia. La conciencia en sí misma es algo inútil desde el punto de vista evolutivo, porque no hace nada, no tiene ningún efecto. Y por tanto es invisible a la selección natural, es indiferente que esté o que no esté. Pero seguramente era un efecto secundario de algo que sí que tenía una ventaja evolutiva, y de ahí que fuera seleccionado. Por tanto, la formulación de Popper no nos sirve. Pero hay otra forma mucho más potente del argumento, y la encontramos en el filósofo William James, o más recientemente en Hedda Hasselhoff y Jason McGill, y consiste en lo siguiente. Primero nos fijamos en que, por regla general, la experiencia consciente subjetiva encaja de un modo sospechosamente armónico con nuestro comportamiento. Sin ir más lejos, el dolor está generalmente asociado con lo dañino, y el placer, en cambio, pues con lo beneficioso. No alimentarse, no beber, no dormir, cortarse un brazo, comer algo en mal estado, quemarse, saltar de un precipicio. Todos estos y muchos otros comportamientos dañinos y peligrosos están asociados con experiencias subjetivas desagradables.
Y pagar impuestos también, claro.
Llenar el estómago, descansar, hacer ejercicio moderado y practicar el delicioso. Cosas súper beneficiosas de cara a la supervivencia y la reproducción, pues están asociadas a experiencias subjetivas placenteras y agradables. Claro, la explicación obvia y natural es que cualquier organismo al que le fuera placentero romperse los huesos y doloroso reproducirse, pues se habría extinguido hace tiempo, porque el dolor se siente mal y provoca aversión, y el placer en cambio se siente bien y provoca que uno lo busque. Pero esta respuesta no la puede dar el epifenomenalista. Porque el epifenomenalista piensa que la experiencia consciente subjetiva no tiene ningún efecto sobre la realidad. No es porque sean dolorosos que evitamos los comportamientos dañinos, ni es porque nos generan placer que buscamos los beneficiosos. Actuamos como actuamos por las reacciones electroquímicas que se dan en nuestro cerebro, con independencia de lo que estemos sintiendo. Pero entonces esta armonía entre experiencia consciente subjetiva y comportamiento resulta de lo más sorprendente, porque si el epifenomenalismo es verdad, pues a la evolución le va a dar igual lo que un organismo sienta o experimente subjetivamente. Reproducirse podría ser una verdadera tortura desde el punto de vista subjetivo. Eso daría igual mientras los procesos cerebrales fueran los correctos y hicieran que nuestros miembros se movieran de la manera adecuada. En el epifenomenalismo, para huir de un depredador no necesito verlo ni sentir miedo. Solo hace falta que la luz entre por mis ojos y termine desencadenando una serie de reacciones químicas que hagan que mis piernas se alejen a toda prisa. Mientras tanto, por poder, podría estar teniendo la experiencia simple de ver el color azul, de oír un pitido o de estar de vacaciones en París. Todo eso daría igual porque no tendría ningún efecto en el movimiento de mis músculos. Es decir, el problema es que el epifenomenalismo no predice que tendríamos esta armonía entre experiencia consciente subjetiva y comportamiento, este encaje o asociación tan curiosa. Esperaríamos todo lo contrario, de hecho, en cuyo caso la mejor explicación de esta armonía, de este encaje, es que el epifenomenalismo sea falso. En realidad, la experiencia subjetiva sí importa de cara a lo que uno haga con su cuerpo. Si estos dos primeros argumentos te han parecido contundentes, espérate a oír los que vienen a continuación. Pero antes te pido que si te está gustando este vídeo y estás aprendiendo algo nuevo, me des un buen like porque eso me ayuda a llegar a mucha más gente. Y aprovecho para recomendarte mi libro ¿Hay filosofía en tu nevera? Si quieres aprender y profundizar más sobre la filosofía de una manera amena, divertida y accesible, este libro está escrito para ti. Además, todo este tema del epifenomenalismo y mucho más lo trato en el libro. Bien, vayamos más allá, porque creo que los absurdos de esta teoría llegan incluso más lejos. Nuestro tercer argumento es que si el epifenomenalismo es verdad, entonces sería imposible que nos comunicáramos. Piénsalo bien, ¿qué pasa cuando uno tiene una conversación? Que yo te hago una pregunta, por ejemplo, tú escuchas, entiendes lo que te estoy diciendo, piensas la respuesta y entonces me la dices. Es decir, tenemos una mezcla de procesos físicos, mis cuerdas vocales vibrando, ondas sonoras llegando a tu oído, ciertas reacciones neurológicas en tu cerebro y también procesos mentales. Entiendes lo que digo, piensas una respuesta, reflexionas, decides lo que decir, pero fíjate, para yo poder decirte realmente lo que estoy pensando, para que tú y yo nos podamos comunicar, lo que yo pienso tiene que poder salir de mi mente, tiene que poder tener un efecto sobre los sonidos que salen de mi boca. Pero esto es justo lo que el epifenomenalista niega. Para él, las palabras que dices son un resultado exclusivamente de tus procesos neurofisiológicos. Dices lo que dices no porque estés pensando lo que estás pensando, sino exclusivamente porque en tu cerebro se dan tales y tales reacciones químicas. Es un poco como si yo te lanzara una palabra de piedra, la palabra gato. El significado de la palabra no te abre la cabeza. Lo que te abre la cabeza son las propiedades físicas de la piedra, su forma, velocidad, dureza, etc. O como la soprano que rompe un vaso cantando rómpete. El vaso no se ha roto por el significado de la palabra que estaba cantando. Habría pasado lo mismo si la palabra hubiera significado otra cosa completamente distinta o si no hubiera significado nada en absoluto. De modo similar, para el epifenomenalista, el contenido mental de mis pensamientos no puede tener un efecto sobre cómo vibran mis cuerdas vocales. Los sonidos que salen de mi boca son producidos exclusivamente por las propiedades neurofisiológicas de mis procesos cerebrales, por su dimensión física, no por su dimensión mental. Pero entonces, si el epifenomenalismo es verdad, nunca nadie ha tenido una conversación. Nunca nadie ha podido comunicarle a otra persona lo que piensa o siente, porque nada de lo que se da dentro de su mente tiene realmente de por sí un efecto sobre los sonidos que emite su boca. Pero esto vuelve a encerrarnos en el absurdo más radical. Argumentamos, razonamos, debatimos, etc., porque estamos convencidos de que el contenido de nuestros pensamientos puede cambiar la opinión de otras personas. Pero ¿por qué perdería el tiempo hablando y discutiendo si realmente creyera que mi pensamiento no puede salir de sí mismo? Para el epifenomenalista, mi cuerpo ahora lleva no sé cuántos minutos regurgitando sonidos sin parar y absolutamente ninguno es el que es por las cosas que yo quiero transmitir. De la misma manera, ningún científico nunca ha podido explicar su razonamiento o sus observaciones en un artículo o en una conferencia, porque sus observaciones y pensamientos no tienen un efecto real sobre lo que dice o escribe. Los médicos hacen el payaso preguntándote si te duele algo, porque tu dolor no puede informar la manera en la que tus cuerdas vocales van a vibrar para responderle. Y por lo mismo los neurocientíficos pierden el tiempo también preguntándoles a los sujetos de sus experimentos ¿qué sientes si te toco esta parte del cerebro? ¿O qué es lo que estás pensando o imaginando para poder correlacionarlo con tu actividad cerebral? Y todo esto, claro está, se aplica al mismo epifenomenalista. Tampoco él puede decirnos realmente lo que piensa sobre la conciencia, porque lo que piensa sobre la conciencia tiene la misma relación con lo que dice o escribe que el humo con el movimiento de la locomotora. Ninguna. En otras palabras, si lo que el epifenomenalista piensa y siente no tiene un efecto real sobre lo que dice o escribe, entonces lo que dice o escribe no puede ser sobre lo que piensa o siente, en cuyo caso la comunicación es imposible, pero es
¿Qué es el epifenomenalismo y cómo se relaciona con el zombie filosófico? El epifenomenalismo es un término recurrente en filosofía de la mente, sobre todo en los debates referentes a la existencia de la conciencia y su funcionalidad. Por ejemplo, si la conciencia surgió de la evolución del ser humano y el desarrollo del cerebro, y si tiene alguna utilidad. Hay autores que niegan la existencia de la conciencia o que si existe no tiene importancia, por lo que consideran que la conciencia, nuestra capacidad de experimentar subjetivamente la realidad, es un epifenómeno, es decir, un fenómeno secundario y sin importancia para la acción, los eventos del mundo y la inteligencia en general. De ahí la etimología de epi, que significa secundario o periférico, y fenómeno, obviamente de lo que aparece o lo que se da. Para más claridad, un epifenómeno es, por ejemplo, la espuma que emerge del mar, de la cerveza o del chocolate, o el humo del fuego o el vapor que sale de los trenes, o las lágrimas del llanto o de la felicidad. A saber, son fenómenos que se dan, cosas que están ahí, pero y ya, no afectan el resto del mundo o no tienen un papel causal importante en otros efectos físicos. La espuma se da pero no es importante en lo que hace el mar o el sabor de la cerveza. Igualmente, el vapor de un tren no determina la velocidad de este objeto. o las lágrimas no determinan la intensidad de la emoción en particular, si es tristeza o felicidad. Si la conciencia es un epifenómeno, como la espuma, quiere decir de que está ahí, pero no sirve para nada. Tenemos experiencias de las cosas y tener subjetividad de ello, pero eso no es determinante de lo que hacemos, o que nuestra subjetividad individual determine las acciones objetivas que hacemos en el día a día. Es decir, que si la conciencia es un epifenómeno, es inútil para las acciones de un ser inteligente, por lo que la conciencia no define la inteligencia, de manera que si quitamos la conciencia, seguiríamos haciendo lo mismo. Y allí, en esta lógica, es donde entra el término también muy famoso en filosofía de la mente, que es el de zombie filosófico. Un zombie en filosofía se refiere a un ser inteligente, como tú y como yo, con la única diferencia que no tiene conciencia, no tiene una experiencia subjetiva de las cosas, pero que actúa como nosotros gracias a las causas físicas y mecánicas de su cuerpo. Un zombie filosófico puede ser una máquina o una inteligencia artificial que no necesita conciencia para ser inteligente. De manera que así, desde esta postura, se argumenta que no es necesario que una máquina tenga conciencia o la llegue a evolucionar para ser inteligente, pues haría lo mismo que nosotros, y aunque nosotros sí tengamos conciencia, esta realidad no afecta en nada a lo que ya estaríamos predestinados a hacer. En otras palabras, que no hay diferencia real entre un ser consciente y otro que no lo es, por lo que si nuestro cerebro crea la conciencia, esta no tiene una función evolutiva central, o que la evolución nos dio la conciencia pero que no sirve para nada. Es un epifenómeno como la espuma que siempre emerge del mar, pero que la espuma no determina el comportamiento del mar o de las olas del océano. Sin embargo, sí hay otros autores y filósofos que sí defienden que la evolución del cerebro llevó a que se creara la conciencia porque sí tiene un papel útil en la acción de los seres inteligentes. Es decir, que la conciencia no es un epifenómeno porque sí tiene una función causal en la acción de las personas. Que nuestras acciones diarias se pueden explicar porque experimentamos, pensamos, sentimos, planeamos y tenemos razones de hacer esto y aquello, por lo que entraríamos en el debate del libre albedrío y el determinismo. Es decir, la discusión de los que dicen que la mente y la conciencia sí causan nuestras acciones y nuestros actos, y de los que dicen que no, que la acción puede darse en un zombie filosófico y que la conciencia es un epifenómeno inútil para el comportamiento. Y bueno, ¿tú qué piensas? ¿Crees que la conciencia es un epifenómeno y no sirve para nada? ¿O crees que tu conciencia causa las acciones que realizas a diario? Te leo en los comentarios.
Pero creo que tu objeción tiene un problema.
A ver.
Y es que no me parece que es, o sea, creo que no sería solamente un problema para el dualismo de sustancia, sino que sería también un problema para el dualismo que hemos dicho de propiedades, ¿vale? Y entonces te estaría condenando a una posición que se llama epifenomenalista, ¿vale? Y el epifenomenalismo lo que te está diciendo es que la conciencia es un producto de los procesos cerebrales, pero no interactúa con los procesos físicos, ¿sí? Es decir, el cerebro es una máquina que funciona exclusivamente en base a las leyes de la física. La conciencia en ningún momento entra dentro de lo que sucede en el cerebro para cambiar, digamos, la dirección de los acontecimientos, ¿vale? Entonces, lo que me estabas diciendo es una objeción contra el interaccionismo del dualismo de sustancias, pero también es una objeción contra el interaccionismo sencillamente que no sea de un dualismo de sustancias, sino que sea simplemente un dualismo de propiedades, ¿vale? Y creo que eso es un problema muy heavy, porque me parece que el epifenomenalismo es muy absurdo, ¿vale? Pero creo que tu objeción tiene un problema.
A ver.
Y es que no me parece que es, o sea, creo que no sería solamente
en filosofía hay dos líneas de pensamiento. Una es el dualismo y el otro es el monismo. Dualismo es pensar que existe un mundo físico, material, ¿sabes? Esta mesa, los átomos,
Sí.
y un segundo mundo que es el mundo de las ideas. Por ejemplo, la conciencia es material Y hay una persona que es monista que dice, no, todo es material, no existe el mundo de las ideas. ¿Por qué? Porque las ideas son impulsos electromagnéticos entre tus dos neuronas y eso es una idea. Nosotros a lo mejor no hemos llegado a la capacidad de poder explicarla, pero ahí está la idea, en esa conexión de sinapsis entre dos neuronas. Eso dirían los monistas. Realmente no existen las ideas, solo existen las descargas eléctricas entre dos neuronas. El dualista no. El dualista dice, no, sí existe el mundo material, el mundo físico, pero existe un otro mundo, que es el mundo de las ideas. El mundo de las ideas, el mundo de la conciencia, está vinculado y es afectado por el mundo material, pero no es material en sí. O sea, tú no puedes decir, o sea, tú, por más que hoy nos estamos acercando de que los neurones, los protones, ¿sabes? La física cuántica y ver que una partícula puede tener movimiento y posición, pero no las dos cosas al mismo tiempo. Sí. O sea, la idea es, en algún momento vamos a llegar a un punto de descubrimiento donde vamos a decir, yo sé lo que es físicamente una idea. Sí. Los monistas defienden que sí, los dualistas dicen que no.
Eso está...
Epiphenomenalism is a position on the mind-body problem which holds that physical and biochemical events within the human body are the sole cause of mental events such as thought, consciousness, and cognition. According to this view, subjective mental events are completely dependent for their existence on corresponding physical and biochemical events within the human body, yet themselves have no influence over physical events. The appearance that subjective mental states, such as intentions, influence physical events is merely an illusion. Epiphenomenalism is a controversial view, but it has been defended by some prominent philosophers, including Thomas Huxley and Gilbert Ryle. It is often seen as a way of solving the mind-body problem, which is the question of how mental states and events can be causally related to physical states and events. One way to understand epiphenomenalism is to think of it as a type of parallelism or dualism. This is the view that mental and physical states and events exist independently of each other, but that they run in parallel. Epiphenomenalism is a type of parallelism in which mental states and events are caused by physical states and events, but they do not themselves cause anything. Another way to understand epiphenomenalism is to think of it as a type of supervenience. Supervenience is a philosophical relation in which one set of properties supervenes on another set of properties if and only if the first set of properties cannot change without the second set of properties also changing. Epiphenomenalism is a type of supervenience in which mental states and events supervene on physical states and events. This means that mental states and events cannot change without the corresponding physical states and events also changing, but the opposite is not the case. Physical states and events can change without the corresponding mental states and events also changing. There are a number of arguments for epiphenomenalism. First, there is the argument from causal exclusion. This argument is based on the observation that physical events can cause other physical events, but mental events cannot cause physical events. For example, a push can cause a person to fall, but a thought cannot cause a person to fall. This suggests that mental events are not part of the physical causal order and therefore cannot have any causal effects on physical events. Then there's the argument from anomalous monism. This argument is based on the observation that mental events are very different from physical events. Physical events are objective and public, while mental events are subjective and private. This suggests that mental events are a completely different kind of thing than physical events and therefore cannot have any causal effects on physical events. Next, we must consider the argument from the impossibility of knowledge of other minds. This argument is based on the observation that it is impossible to know for sure what other people are thinking. This is because we can only access other people's minds through their behavior, and their behavior can be caused by a variety of factors, both mental and physical. This suggests that mental events are not directly accessible to other people and therefore cannot have any causal effects on other people's behavior. Another argument is made from the causal ambiguity of behavior. This argument is based on the observation that the same behavior can be caused by different mental states. For example, a person might raise their hand in class because they want to ask a question, or they might raise their hand because they want to go to the bathroom. This suggests that mental states do not have a unique causal relationship with behavior and therefore cannot be the sole cause of behavior. Epiphenomenalists say that we should consider the illusion of free will. This argument is based on the observation that our sense of free will is illusory. This is because our behavior is ultimately determined by physical events beyond our control, such as our genes and our upbringing. This suggests that mental states, such as our desires and intentions, do not play a causal role in our behavior, and therefore cannot be the basis of free will. Finally, some philosophers have argued for epiphenomenalism on the basis that it is the simplest explanation of the mind-body problem. They argue that if mental events have no causal effects on physical events, then we can avoid the difficult problem of explaining how mental events interact with physical events altogether. There are also a number of arguments against epiphenomenalism. We will first discuss the argument from common sense. We all have a common sense understanding that our mental states, such as our beliefs, desires, and intentions, play a causal role in our behavior. For example, we believe that we choose to do things because we want to do them and that we can avoid doing things if we try hard enough. Epiphenomenalism denies this common sense understanding of the world. Next, there's the argument for moral responsibility. If epiphenomenalism is true, then we cannot be held morally responsible for our actions. This is because our mental states do not cause our behavior and therefore we cannot be held responsible for the consequences of our actions. This is a disturbing conclusion for many people as it seems to undermine our sense of justice. We must also consider the argument from scientific implausibility. It is difficult to explain how mental states could have evolved in the first place if they have no causal effects on physical events. After all, science tells us that evolution is a process of natural selection and natural selection only favors traits that increase an organism's fitness. Therefore, it is difficult to see how mental states that have no causal effects on physical events could increase an organism's fitness. Then there's the argument from the problem of qualia. Qualia are the subjective experiences of mental states such as pain and pleasure. Epiphenomenalism has difficulty explaining the existence of qualia. If mental states have no causal effects on physical events, then it is difficult to see how they could produce qualia. Lastly, we will consider the argument from the supervenience of mental states on physical states. Some philosophers argue that mental states are supervenient on physical states. If mental states are supervenient on physical states, then it seems that mental states must have some causal effects on physical events. Otherwise, it would be possible for two people to have the same physical states but different mental states, which is a possibility that epiphenomenalism denies. If epiphenomenalism is true, it has a number of important implications. First, this would imply that free will is illusory. If epiphenomenalism is true, then our mental states, such as our desires and intentions, do not cause our behavior. This means that our actions are ultimately determined by physical events beyond our control. This is a disturbing conclusion for many people, as it seems to undermine our sense of free will. It would also imply that moral responsibility is illusory. If epiphenomenalism is true, then we cannot be held morally responsible for our actions. This is because our mental states do not cause our behavior, and therefore we cannot be held responsible for the consequences of our actions. This is another disturbing conclusion, as it seems to undermine our sense of justice. If epiphenomenalism is true, then this would imply that the mind is nothing more than an illusion. Our thoughts, feelings, and experiences are all caused by physical events in the brain, but they have no causal effects on the physical world. This is a humbling conclusion, as it suggests that our conscious experience is ultimately irrelevant to the universe. This may lead to a sense of fatalism and despair. In addition to these philosophical implications, epiphenomenalism could also have a number of practical implications. For example, if epiphenomenalism is true, then it is possible that we could develop medications or technologies that could directly control people's behavior without their knowledge or consent. This could raise a number of ethical concerns. One of the main challenges for epiphenomenalism is the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness is the problem of explaining why we have subjective experiences at all. Why does it feel like something to be us? Epiphenomenalists have offered a number of different responses to the hard problem of consciousness. One response is to say that the hard problem is not a real problem. They argue that there is nothing to explain, because subjective experiences are not real things. They are just illusions. Another response to the hard problem of consciousness is to say that it is a mystery. Epiphenomenalists who take this view argue that the hard problem is beyond our current understanding of the mind and the brain. However, they believe that it is possible that we will one day be able to explain the hard problem of consciousness, even if we cannot explain it now. Another challenge for epiphenomenalism is the issue of free will. If epiphenomenalism is true, then our choices and actions are ultimately caused by physical events in our brains. This would seem to undermine the idea of free will. Epiphenomenalists have offered a number of different responses to the challenge of free will. Epiphenomenalists argue that they are compatibilists and that free will is still possible even if our mental states do not cause our behavior. They contend that free will does not require that our actions be undetermined. Instead, free will simply requires that we have the ability to choose between different courses of action, even if our choices are ultimately determined by physical events. Epiphenomenalists believe that our sense of free will is illusory. They say that we feel as though we have free will because we are not aware of the physical events that are determining our behavior. However, even if our sense of free will is illusory, this does not mean that we are not free. We can still be said to be free if we have the ability to choose between different courses of action, even if our choices are ultimately determined by physical events. Epiphenomenalists can argue that moral responsibility is still possible even if our mental states do not cause our behavior. They think that we can still be held morally responsible for our actions if we have the ability to understand the difference between right and wrong and if we have the ability to choose to do the right thing. Epiphenomenalism is a controversial view, but it is a serious attempt to solve the mind-body problem. It is a view that is consistent with our scientific knowledge of the brain, but it also has some implications that seem to be incompatible with our common sense experience of the world. As we discussed, there are a number of arguments for and against epiphenomenalism. It is ultimately up to each individual to decide whether or not they find epiphenomenalism to be a plausible view. Thanks for watching. Please give us a like if you enjoyed this video and feel free to comment to let us know your thoughts on it. Also, check out our other study review videos on other philosophers and philosophies.
Ken Wilber's model of the 4 quadrants is the centerpiece of the integral philosophy, and it is one of the most useful tools you'll ever come across for conceptualizing the different dimensions of the human experience and the different domains of knowledge. With relevance to what we've been talking about recently on the channel, it's a way of understanding the voice of Jordan Peterson in contrast to that of Michel Foucault and the social justice movement. It's also a good way of situating a lot of the material we have looked at in the past, from the fault line between materialist atheists and traditional Buddhists, to the perspective that humanity isn't a cancer, but more relatable to the behaviour of bacteria. We'll see where Marx and Freud's work fits in, where Nietzsche is operating from, and where schools like semiotics, empiricism, and phenomenology fit on the map. In Wilber's work, this 4 quadrants model is a map of the entirety of reality. It's the central point of his attempt to integrate all human knowledge and experience together so that we can find ourselves in a unified, holistic cosmos again, rather than having to choose which school of thought we align with. It's a really interesting theory that maps everything from the internal experience of bacteria to the Gaia hypothesis, the Big Bang, language, and power dynamics. There's a lot of moving parts, and some parts of it I'm not 100% sold on, but in this episode we're going to focus in on the human element and look at why this model is such a useful way to frame the domains of human existence and knowledge. This tickles your mind and you want to dive deeper, I'd highly recommend Wilber's book, A Theory of Everything. And if you really want to give it a deeper dive, then I would highly recommend his book, Sex, Ecology, Spirituality. With that out of the way, let's talk about the 4 quadrant map. So the first thing to note is that these quadrants are mapped out over 2 axes. The x-axis separates the individual quadrants on the top from the collective quadrants on the bottom, while the y-axis separates the internal quadrants on the left-hand side from the external quadrants on the right-hand side. This leaves us with 4 different quadrants. The first quadrant, Q1 in the upper left, is the quadrant of the internal and individual. The second quadrant, Q2, in the upper right, is the space of the external and individual. The bottom left quadrant, Q3, is the internal and collective. And finally, the bottom right, Q4, is the external and collective. Another way of talking about them is as the I, the it, the we, and the its. Now that we have them divided up, let's explore what each of these quadrants actually contain. In the first quadrant, we have the internal individual aspect of our lives. Here you'll find our thoughts, our feelings, our moods, as well as our logic. All the wonderful things that happen in your little noggin happen right up here in Q1. So you can think of the work of Freud here, who's focused on the individual's internal life, or of the Stoics or Buddhists, who are focused on our relationship to our internal world. But the purest example I think of Q1 is Husserl's phenomenology, which seeks to understand human experience without any reference to anything outside of the mind. It's about pure personal experience. And everything that happens in this first quadrant has a correlate in Q2, the quadrant of the external individual dimension of our being. Whenever you have one of your harebrained thoughts, it doesn't happen in some disentangled mental sphere. If we shove you in an fMRI machine, having juiced you up with dye, we'll be able to see your brain light up when you have this thought. And when we call it a stupid thought, we'll see your amygdala light up in defensive anger. But then, as you tell yourself you're better than that and you remember to breathe, we'll see your prefrontal cortex light up as it tries to get your little tantrum under control. And of course, it's not just about what's going on in the brain. There's the release of hormones, the depth or shallowness of your breathing, your heart rate. All of these things mirror the psychological experience that you're having. Everything that happens internally happens externally. Every thought has a physical side and a mental side. Same goes for your emotions. So that's Q1 and Q2. This is the nature of your individual mind-body system. But the individual element is only one half of the human experience. None of this makes sense without understanding what grounds it and contextualizes it. But for that, we need to look at Q3 and Q4, the collective sides of the human experience. Q3 is the most intangible of the quadrants. The internal and individual is easy to grasp because it's the thoughts and ideas you're having in your own head. But Q3 is a little trickier to point out at first, but it's everywhere. As ever, Nietzsche hits the nail on the head. In the third aphorism of Beyond Good and Evil, he writes that most of the conscious thinking of a philosopher is secretly guided and forced into certain channels by his instincts. Behind all logic and its seeming sovereignty of movement too, there stand valuations, or more clearly, physiological demands for the preservation of a certain type of life. Q3 is the internal ocean that we swim in. This is the quadrant of language, culture, value systems, and worldviews. The personal Q1 experience is completely shaped by the Q3 ocean. In the episode on Saussure's semiotics, we talked about the difference between langue and parole, which you can think of in terms of a game of chess. So you have the langue chess, which is the hidden rules of the game, and then you have the parole, which is the 1,000,001 instantiations of those rules. It's the individual games of chess that happen within the context of that set of rules. Language has a similar hidden structure that gives meaning to every instance of speech and writing. Linguists have unearthed the structure of language, nouns, tenses, articles, word order, but the structure pre-existed the archaeological work of the linguist. The same goes for culture and for value systems. They are intangibles that we don't directly touch, but which shape our experience of the world. They are the riverbanks that, unbeknownst to the river, are guiding and steering its course. And this is a good analogy, because the billion drops of water in the river shape the riverbank, which in turn redirects the river. There's an active relationship between the bank, which steers the river, and the movement of the water through this guided path, changing the path. To give a concrete example, you can think of the experience of hunger. The Q1/Q2 experience of hunger is very different for a hunter-gatherer and a Western middle-class individual. There's a similar physiological experience, but the meaning that this experience is given and the actions it inspires are completely different, and that is because of the different Q3 oceans that these individuals are swimming in. The hunter-gatherer will reach for the bow and arrow, where the Westerner grabs their wallet or their phone. The individual experience is in some senses very similar. I am hungry, I want not to be hungry, I'm going to go do something about that. But the reality couldn't be more different. One thinks about going out to hunt, the other thinks about going to the shop or opening an app on their phone. This reaction to the personal experience of hunger is shaped by the cultural Q3 backdrop. As Wittgenstein once wrote, the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. Q4 is the outside of this collective experience. It is the empirical side of the collective equation. In Q3, we have the internal experience of collectivity. There's language and culture. There's our values and worldviews. And just as the individual thoughts, feelings, and ideas have their empirical correlates in the brain and body, so these components of the internal collectivity have their own empirical correlates. In Sex, Ecology, Spirituality, Wilber summarizes the contents of Q4 as follows. This quadrant includes the exterior of any of the social aspects of human interaction, including forms of production and techno-economic modes, bow and arrow, horticultural tools, agrarian implements, industrial machinery, computers, and so on. Architectural structures, transportation systems, physical infrastructure, even written material forms of books, legal codes, linguistic structures, verbal signifiers, and so forth. One great way of explaining the difference between the Q3 culture and the Q4 society is Wilber's example of going to a foreign country. So let's say you go to a country where you don't speak the language and that is completely different to your culture. When you first arrive, you are in the Q4 society, but you're not in the Q3 culture. You can observe the architecture, the population density, the relative wealth and poverty, the demographics. You can see what technologies they have and how their society is structured. This is all Q4. You are surrounded by this Q4 society. But until you learn the language and learn to talk to the people, you don't have access to the Q3 culture. You don't know what the worldview of the people is. You don't know what they value or why they do what they do. You don't know the power structures. You're seeing the outside of their collectivity. You're seeing the Q4, but you haven't looked into the inside of the collectivity. You haven't seen into their collective value system. Without language and interaction, this isn't possible. So these are the 4 quadrants then of the human experience. We exist in 4 domains all at once. It's not just our personal thoughts, but our physical bodies that are the outside of these thoughts and feelings. There's the collective value system that contextualizes and makes parts of this individual experience more salient than others. Finally, there's the outside of this collectivity. Everything from the architecture of your local shop to the supply chain of trucks to keep it stocked, and all the technologies that make this supply chain work and that construct this architecture. Our lives at any moment can be viewed from these 4 angles, which give very different insights. So now that we've briefly sketched out these 4 dimensions of the human experience, let's play around with it a little bit as an intellectual map. So, as we've already seen in Q1, we have thinkers like Freud, the Stoics, and the spiritual thinkers like Buddha, Jesus, Anthony de Mello, Jed McKenna. All these thinkers are focused on the internal individual dimension of existence. Moving over to Q2, we'll find thinkers like John Locke and B.F. Skinner. This is the realm of the hard sciences like physics, chemistry, and biology. This is a quadrant of empiricism and of studying individual things through observation and measurement. You isolate the individual being to be studied, and you experiment to understand its qualities and its nature. Coming down to Q3, we find Nietzsche's work on the revaluation of all values, on the Dionysian versus the Apollonian, and on the distinction between master and slave morality. We have Kuhn's work on paradigms as being the grounding culture that a science exists in at any moment in time. We have the structuralists and their search for the underlying structures of human life. We have Foucault's work on power and Saussure's work on semiotics. We also have Adam Smith's invisible hand of the market. And finally then, we have Q4, where we have the study of the external collective. Down here, we have fields like ecology and chaos theory. We have Marx's economic theories and statistical studies of human societies. Jordan Peterson has published a lot of papers on the Q4 findings of the ocean personality model and how, for example, it is more common for people with high politeness to be right-leaning, while those with higher compassion are more likely to be left-leaning. This is also where a lot of Steven Pinker's work with the better angels of our nature is focused. There's the philosophy of utilitarianism, Auguste Comte's theories of social evolution, and the science of climate change. All of these theories and systems are directed at studying the outsides of the collective experience. The four quadrants model is also a great way of understanding the different arguments that are going on in the culture at any one point in time. A recent exploration of Jordan Peterson and the social justice movement can be understood as a conflict between Peterson's Q1 vision of personal responsibility and creating change in the individual realm, coming into conflict with the social justice movement's belief that change lies in the collective sphere by tackling oppression, bigotry, and bias in the culture. Peterson says, be the change you wish to see in the world, while the social justice movement says, let's make the world fair for everyone. They both want to make the world a better place, but get frustrated with each other over how to do that. When you look at Richard Dawkins' attacks on religion as a delusion or as a virus, you're seeing a Q2 conflict with Q1. Dawkins is a rationalist materialist. Matter is the fundamental thing. The externals are the fundamental thing. This religious stuff doesn't fit the mold of empirical science, and so it belongs in the trash heap. We can see how each quadrant can reduce the world to their little section of reality. It's not just the materialist saying that matter is all there is and reducing all internal phenomena to firings in the brain. There's plenty of spiritual folk out there who say that the mind is all that there is. There's the claim associated with Derrida that everything is interpretation, or the idea associated with Foucault that power is all that there is. All of these are distinct forms of reductionism coming from the different corners of the map. Everyone has their way of seeing things, and they have to explain why that way is the most important way. The four quadrants model allows us to take a step back and to give a more balanced appraisal of the situation. It gives us a way of looking at each silo with a little more distance and objectivity. Like any model, it's imperfect, but it's extremely useful as a way of diffusing intellectual conflicts and unpacking what is actually going on beneath the surface. That's everything for this episode of The Living Philosophy. If you've enjoyed it, please give the video a thumbs up down below. And as ever, I'd like to thank Shane and all the other patrons of the channel for their support in keeping this thing going. If you want to support the channel, you can head over to Patreon, where you can get your name in the credits, as well as early access to scripts, videos, and a few other things as well. If you have any thoughts, insights, or feedback, I would love to hear from you down in the comments. Otherwise, I shall see you next time. Thank you for watching.
Today, we're going to give a 30-minute summary of the entire history of philosophy. And if you are ever sort of pushed on your heels by somebody name dropping a particular philosopher and you're not sure how to understand them, I'll tell you what, once you understand this summary and you can memorize this story of philosophy, no matter what name anybody drops at you, even if you've never heard them before, I'm going to give you a story within which you can locate that person so that you're never going to be caught off guard again. You're going to know the entire history of philosophy, how to make sense of it, and how to...
Ken Wilber's model of the four quadrants is the centerpiece of the integral philosophy, and it is one of the most useful tools you'll ever come across.
Imagine that on your journey of self-discovery and personal development that there's a general map that one follows as they mature. Wouldn't that be pretty helpful to know? Well, these frameworks exist. They've been created by the world's finest minds. Decades of research back them up. They're very niche. You really have to seek them out and absorb what they have to say. And they don't teach you this stuff in college. I'll provide my reasoning to why I think that is later on in the video. But my life has been completely changed by these developmental psychology frameworks. My understanding of human nature has radically increased. The way I view humanity as a whole has completely changed, particularly changing my view on what it actually takes to create a more peaceful, loving, and united society, what it takes to actually transform humanity. That's how my view has changed. So if you've ever wondered the questions, why are some people so loving and inclusive while others seemingly so hateful and divisive? Why is everyone so different? What is ideal and healthy human maturity like? What is self-actualization? What is ego? Who is more right, liberals or conservatives? And if you've asked those questions, then listen up, because you are going to get very clear answers to these questions in a way that you've never thought about before. So I ask about 45 minutes of your time today. This will be a little bit longer of a video, but I guarantee you will increase your understanding of human nature. And if you were like me when I first learned these frameworks, then your life will change forever. And it's all just going to come in about 45 minutes of your time, and you probably spend more amount of time per day just scrolling your phone mindlessly. So instead of doing that, just attentively watch this video and your life very well may change. So the main frameworks I am pulling from today are ego development theory created by Harvard psychologist Dr. Susan Cook-Greuter and spiral dynamics by Dr. Don Beck and Christopher Cohen. I find ego development theory to be superior in explaining individual growth and spiral dynamics superior in explaining cultural and societal growth. But both frameworks are great for understanding both. And what philosopher Ken Wilber did, I think he's one of the greatest philosophers of all time. His mind is absolutely extraordinary. And what he did is he pulled from all these different frameworks, even besides ego development theory and spiral dynamics. He's pulled from basically every human developmental psychology model ever created and synthesized them all together to compose this overarching meta theory of how all of this comes together in the big picture. And what I'm going to describe today is essentially the aspect of this integral theory that describes the evolution of consciousness through the various different stages, which represents individual and collective growth of humans over time and over all the eras and all the epochs. So the first thing to make note of is that these frameworks are theories of vertical development, and to understand what vertical development is, we must first talk about what horizontal development is. And horizontal development is the type of growth that you're probably most familiar with, yet you don't have this particular way of framing it. So horizontal development refers to conceptual knowledge acquisition and like very specific skill cultivation. It's mostly what you go to college for, and it's mostly what we think of when we think of, the terms personal development or self-improvement. We tend to think of things like becoming more fit, cultivating charisma, pursuing romantic partners, or something like learning how to code, or becoming better at math, or becoming better at filmmaking, or something like that. In this horizontal development, it's an additive process. It's acquiring more skills, acquiring more knowledge to sort of add to your resume as a person, whether it be to gain self-confidence, look better in front of other people, look for potential job prospects, or just develop in the skills you find interesting because you intrinsically enjoy them. And this type of development is not what these frameworks are talking about. These frameworks are models of vertical development, and to develop vertically is to develop a more holistic, expansive, sophisticated, and complex way of relating to self and world. To develop vertically is to take a leap in perspective and to expand the lens in the way you relate to the world. So what you see here on the screen is basically the entire structure and pathway of vertical development. It's the outward expansion of consciousness to include larger and larger wholes of reality in its embrace. So to develop vertically is sort of like upgrading the operating system of your mind, because the way in which you derive meaning is upgraded to a larger whole within reality. So if you only care about yourself and your immediate family, then finding meaning in a larger group, such as a church or something like that, would be a leap in vertical development. And then from there, expanding the area of concern to include, your entire nation would be another upgrade. And then expanding that to include the entire world, from there would be yet another upgrade. And the best part is that as you
better wake up. The final new Autumn Festival playlist is here. Welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Stevie O. And it's time for the Autumn Treasure Hunt. driving by numbers. First quick thing I just want to mention, Horizon Adventure, Horizon Street Scene, Street Racing, Guanajuato Expedition. That is how you unlock the Street Scene Festival. This might come into play if you're a newer player, I'm not 100% sure, but just wanted to throw it out there. Next thing, the car in the photo is the Hoonicorn V1. Now, I think you can use any car for this, and again, just drop it down in the comments what car you end up using. But your objective is a unique one. Go to the Street Scene Outpost and do a figure 8 around the crates. Now, my only real tip for this is to enter from one of the corners where you can see both of the crates in front of you, because this will give you a direct way to do the figure 8, but you're basically just drawing the number 8 with your car around these crates. So literally just full send it, kind of, drift around. If you're using the Hoonicorn V1, just have some throttle control. It's very easy to get this thing loose. And once you complete the figure 8 around the crates, you will see Treasure Challenge Complete pop up, and of course we'll get the orange circle on our map. Next thing you have to do is smash that subscribe button, because these analytics are still unacceptable. But even with that, your boy still got you. Here's the location of the chest on the map, and of course I'm going to drive you right into smashing it. And that is it for your treasure hunt driving by numbers. In my next upload, I'll be showing you the location of another new neon tank for the photo challenge. So don't forget to drop a like, subscribe if you're new, make sure you get all notifications on. We cover these every single week. I'll be live streaming today as well. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you on the next one.
So I've been sucked into a wormhole of nostalgia after the launch of Tokyo Extreme Racer on Steam, most of which I have just played offline for fun, and roughly 40 hours of gameplay and sleep deprivation. I have almost reached the very end of the game, and today I wanted to share the end-game experience with you as well, so we're gonna finish together. And I mean the game, don't make it weird. Let me start from the beginning.
In the beginning,
I bought the game for 30 USD, did 100 push-ups while the game downloaded, finally launched the game, had to choose between 3 starter cars, Suzuki Swift, Toyota AE86 and Mazda MX-5. I chose the AE86. And no, not because of Takumi, sorry to disappoint you. I then had to create my license plate, and of course I made it 6969 because I am a classy gentleman. And now I was finally able to jump into the game for the very first time. I started doing battles and earned a significant amount of credits, but then I also had to spend all the credits on my car upgrades because I was getting my ass whipped by some of the boss battles. But not to worry, I saved up some more credits and finally bought one of my favorite cars in the world, the 180SX. Painted it red with white rims and then ruined the car with some ugly neons. Now at this point I was smooth sailing through the game because the 180SX was significantly faster than the starter car AE86. Yeah, take that Takumi. But there was another car that I really wanted, the Nissan R34. But to access the R34, I would have to beat the endgame boss called Cinderella Past Midnight, which, funny enough, was also my mom's nickname back in the day, and I still don't know why. But this is where we currently are in the game, and we need to beat the last normal boss before we can battle the ultimate endgame boss, Cinderella Past Midnight. But there is one big problem. That one last boss before the Cinderella lady is absolutely unbeatable for my 180SX. So Showa Strong is the last boss that we need to beat before the Cinderella with the Mazda over here. And as you can see, I'm full flooring it right now, and I'm getting gapped straight at the start. So my name being loser is kinda accurate over here because we are losing all our SP points, which by the way is our stamina basically. And we have lost, so the 180 is not good enough to beat Shuwa Strong. And no, even if we use NAS, we will still not be able to beat the boss. And with the tail tucked between our legs, we go back into our garage. Now if you look over here, we have lost 13 times in a row the Shuwa Strong with 0 wins. So we exited here in shame, and we need to go into the menu and unlock an RX-8. Now you might ask, why RX-8? Well, I used Google. I actually looked up what is the fastest car.
Oops.
Bringing some intensity back to Horizon Street Scene? I like it! That's the kind of driving that sent us underground in the first place. Bringing some intensity back to Horizon Street Scene? I like it! That's the kind of driving that sent us underground in the first place.
Coming to you live from the Horizon Festival. Horizon Pulse.
Few questions hold greater importance in science than how it all began. What did the beginning of the universe look like? Why did it happen in the first place? And although we are a long way off from having a complete answer, scientists have learned enough that a theory has been conceived: the Big Bang. By examining stars and the spectrographic data given off by matter when light passes through it, we have assembled the jigsaw pieces of the Big Bang and have begun to form a picture of those first explosive moments. But here's the thing about jigsaws. Sometimes you find a piece that just doesn't fit. At that moment, you realize with a sinking heart, you've made a mistake somewhere along the way, and you have no idea where. Is this what's happening to the Big Bang Theory? Or are we looking at our puzzle piece the wrong way round? It all comes down to an element we use every day. In medicines, alloys, and most importantly, the batteries in our phones. One that is strangely missing from the universe, at least in the amounts we would expect. So here's the big question: where is all the lithium? I'm Alex McColgan, and you're watching Astrum. Join me today as we examine the lithium discrepancy, a mystery that continues to confound scientists to this day and might force us to reevaluate our models if we ever hope to answer the question of where we came from. To begin with, let's cover some of the basics about lithium. Lithium is a relatively simple element. It's one of the alkali metals, and for a metal is surprisingly soft, capable of being cut with just an ordinary steel knife. You might have seen it used in science experiments in school, as it reacts quite satisfyingly when mixed with water, producing lithium hydroxide and hydrogen gas. More commonly, it's used in phone batteries, laptop batteries, and in other electronic devices due to its high electrochemical potential. But the feature of lithium that makes it so important for our discussion is its internal structure. It's made with just 3 protons in the nucleus, meaning it's one of only a handful of very lightweight elements that could be created in the early moments of the universe. But it's the expected presence of lithium in the universe's beginning that causes our problem with the Big Bang model. So what do we think was going on back then? How exactly does lithium prove it's wrong? Well, the universe's origin is murky to us. After the discovery in the 1920s that our universe was expanding, a Belgian cosmologist, Georges Lemaitre, theorized that if the universe was getting larger and cooler, it used to be smaller and hotter, with all that energy being squeezed into a smaller and smaller area. The logical conclusion to this was that if you rewound the universe back to its very beginning, all of the universe's energy would exist in a single point in space. This singularity would be infinitely hot and dense, which makes sense. Based on that heat, this idea is known as the hot Big Bang model. But it's this infinity that causes the murkiness to creep in. Einstein's theory of relativity can be used to predict the motions of objects under the effects of gravity, but no equation tends to function when you start adding infinity into the mix. Hence, at the very first moment of the universe's origin, we don't have the equations to describe very well what was going on, or what caused the universe to start expanding. And with an infinitely hot and dense singularity, there's no way of knowing what might have gone on before it. Any evidence or signals from before that time would have been met with the hottest incinerator the universe has ever created. It happened somehow. That's all we can say for sure. At this point, there would be no lithium. The very start of the universe would have been simply too hot. After that though, even just 1 second after the universe begins to expand, the picture becomes much clearer. 1 second after the universe's expansion began, the temperature of the universe dropped down to a mere 10 billion degrees Celsius, which is actually only 1,000 times the temperature at the center of our sun. This was still hot enough that matter couldn't form yet. The fundamental force that holds together the nuclei of atoms would have been overwhelmed by this intense energy. So everything would have existed in the form of radiation instead, the remnants of which we can still see today in the cosmic background radiation. Discovering this became one of the proofs that scientists are onto something with this model. The universe didn't remain as just radiation for long. Just 99 seconds later, it would have cooled to 1 billion degrees Celsius, and the strong force would have kicked in. The universe's first protons by then had started forming and began binding with neutrons, creating hydrogen and the 1 proton, 1 neutron isotope of hydrogen known as deuterium. Hydrogen and its isotopes, or versions of hydrogen that had the same number of protons but more or less neutrons, were the most common element in the universe. But hydrogen wasn't the only one. Everything was still filled with so much energy that the hydrogen protons frequently smashed into each other, underwent nuclear fusion, and soon created the larger, more complex element helium with 2 protons. Once you run the equations, in the primeval universe, matter was nearly 76% hydrogen and nearly 24% helium. But sometimes, very rarely, another proton would merge with the other 2 and would form isotopes of lithium, bringing the number of protons up to 3 in these atoms. By mass, this made up only 0.00000007% of matter in the early universe. But here is where the mystery comes in. By examining the spectroscopic data from stars, or by evaluating that same light as it passes through clouds of matter, we can evaluate the distributions of elements in the universe today. And what we see roughly matches this prediction. Our own sun is, by mass, 71% hydrogen, 27% helium, and 2% other heavy elements. Which makes sense, as the sun would have had time to undergo more nuclear fusion in its lifetime, slightly altering the ratios of these elements. These ratios are mirrored throughout the universe as a whole, another strong proof that the hot Big Bang model and our equations are right, and that the universe did evolve in this way. And yet, our predictions about lithium are wrong. Although the prediction for the amount of lithium in the early universe is really low, the prediction is actually still too high compared to what we see. 3 times too high. Or, to put it another way, as we study the spectroscopy of primordial stars, the further away the star, the earlier in time the light would have left it, we don't see anywhere near the amount of lithium we ought to be seeing if our prediction was correct. There are further mysteries surrounding lithium. Lithium-7 is the isotope that we tend to see in the early universe. This means that a lithium atom has 3 protons and 4 neutrons in its nucleus. But there is another isotope of lithium, known as lithium-6, with 1 fewer neutron, that is meant to be much less stable and much less common than its counterpart, supposedly making up only 2 out of every 100,000 lithium nuclei. While the amount of lithium in the universe is too low, the ratio of lithium-6 to lithium-7 is much too high. Lithium-6 is a staggering 1,000 times more prevalent in the early universe than it should be. So, what does this mean for the hot Big Bang model? Is it really back to the drawing board for our most trusted theory about the universe's origins? Not necessarily. 2 possibilities exist. One that involves rewriting the Big Bang theory as we know it. But there is another explanation. that might just hold the answer to it all. Given the importance of lithium in technology, we could definitely do with more of it. But there are other chemicals and minerals out there that are beneficial to us, such as ferulic acid, ethyl ascorbic acid, and hyaluronic acid. Don't be fooled by the word acid. In the right amounts, these are all actually surprisingly good for our skin, reducing wrinkles, improving skin hydration, and generally making us feel fresh and younger. And what do they have in common? They're all ingredients used by Geology, who partnered with us in making this video. Except the lithium. Lithium might not be so good for your skin. The thing I love about Geology is that they give you a personalized care routine. It's bespoke just for you. After filling in a 60-second quiz, Geology can help you find the simple, ideal products for you that reduces wrinkles, puffy, dark rings under your eyes, and hydrates and protects your skin. And it works. Geology has more than 10,000 5-star reviews and has won 38 awards from Men's Health, Hypebeast, Esquire, AskMen, and other organizations. Geology has something for everyone, so why not scan my QR code or follow my link in the description below. By using my code ASTROM70 at checkout, you'll get 70% off your trial skincare set and up to 50% off any add-on you want to grab. Give it a try. When faced with something like this, one of two things must be true. Either our observations are wrong, or our models are wrong. Let's consider each possibility. It's difficult to throw out the hot Big Bang model completely. Nothing else does as good a job at explaining the existence of the cosmic background radiation, or the amounts of hydrogen and helium that we see in our universe. The quantities of those elements check out almost exactly with the hot Big Bang's predictions, which seems to be too perfect to be a coincidence. That said, scientists are becoming less certain about the model as it stands. Stephen Hawking, who was once one of the leading advocates of the idea that our universe began with a singularity, later went off the idea. In his book, A Brief History of Time, he stated, "Roger Penrose's and my work became generally accepted, and nowadays nearly everyone assumes that the universe started with a Big Bang singularity. It is perhaps ironic that, having changed my mind, I am now trying to convince other physicists that there was in fact no singularity at the beginning of the universe. As we shall see later, it can disappear once quantum effects are taken into account." Those quantum effects are too complicated to go into for this video, and this doesn't necessarily solve the lithium problem even if true, but it does highlight that the origin of the universe is an evolving branch of physics and cosmology, where the full explanation of it has not yet been found. Perhaps our models will one day adjust in such a way that the lithium problem falls away, even as the broad brushstrokes of the theory remain in place, letting the jigsaw piece of the lithium numbers fit nicely with hydrogen and helium. The other option is that there is something wrong with our observations, and there may well be some grounds to this. Because of the small amounts of lithium being discussed, it is quite difficult to see the exact amounts of it that exist in the interstellar medium once you look far back enough. The only way to probe the interstellar medium's makeup is to shine a light through it and then see which lines in your spectrograph get blocked out. This can tell scientists what elements might make up a particular nebula or dust cloud, but this gets harder and harder to do the further away the target is. Eventually, it becomes completely impossible to get an exact estimate. Instead, scientists are left looking at the spectrographs of primordial stars, which are not necessarily representative of the universe as a whole at that time. A star is a special case. Something going on inside there might be altering the amount of lithium present within, converting the lithium into something else, while boosting the amount of lithium-6, although it's difficult to guess what that process might be. If our observations could improve, and we could better measure the amount of lithium in the early universe as a whole, perhaps the numbers would come back into line on their own. Maybe the lithium problem never existed in the first place. Ultimately, No answer to how the universe came to be will ever be complete until all the available data matches the theory's predictions, whether that's lithium or other problematic elements in the universe like the overabundance of gold out there, which I talk about in this video here. All these numbers have to be brought into line. There is still so much to learn about the universe's origins. I do find it incredible just how much we are able to learn and deduce about events that happened billions of years ago, back before matter itself had properly formed, using just our telescopes and our minds. That picture, the grand picture of how it all began, is waiting to be assembled. However the universe came to be, it is built on a foundation of an underlying order that allows us to unlock its principles, tease out its mysteries, and reconstruct the configuration of its individual pieces. One day, I am confident we will solve the lithium problem too. How can we resist when the answer to our ultimate origins awaits? Some questions are just too important to leave unanswered, and I, for one, can't wait for the day this jigsaw piece is ultimately completed. Thanks for watching. Making this video required some long-term planning and work, which we were only able to do thanks to the consistency and sustainability of your memberships as Astronauts on Patreon. A huge thank you to everyone who has signed up, and if you'd like us to make more videos like this, you can join with the link down below. When you join, you'll be able to watch the whole video ad-free, see your name in the credits, and submit questions to our team. Once again, a huge thank you from myself and the whole Astrum team. Meanwhile, click the link to this playlist for more Astrum content. I'll see you next time.
Michio Kaku ha demostrado científicamente la existencia de Dios al acelerar taquiones a velocidades próximas a la luz, momento en que no podían ser influenciados por ninguna fuerza externa. Esas partículas subatómicas presentaban un enorme desorden, al no estar controladas por las leyes cósmicas establecidas por una inteligencia superior.
Este es un extracto del libro La supraconciencia existe, del reputado cirujano Manuel Sanz Segarra. Un libro que se ha convertido en un auténtico fenómeno de ventas, número 1 en España y muchos otros países. Y no solo los libros, sus vídeos se ven a millones y miles de personas acuden a sus conferencias. Allí nos cuenta sus experiencias como cirujano con pacientes que habían experimentado una SM, es decir, una experiencia cercana a la muerte, y cómo investigando al respecto de ellas ha llegado a la conclusión de la existencia de una supraconciencia, la vida después de la muerte, la reencarnación o la existencia de Dios, algo que justifica por medio de la mecánica cuántica, que fundamenta científicamente, además de hacer numerosas menciones al CERN o a la física de partículas, precisamente el área al que me dediqué durante más de 10 años de estudios. En particular, por si no conocen mi historia, estuve investigando en física de partículas y mecánica cuántica durante 4 años en el CERN, donde hice el doctorado. El CERN es el laboratorio que menciona tantas veces. Esta es la razón, supongo, por la que mucha gente me ha preguntado por la validez y veracidad de algo tan impactante como lo que se expone en el exitoso libro. Vamos, que quieren que reaccione como experto y dé mi opinión. Y ante tantas y tantas consultas y la confusión que ha generado, me he lanzado a responderlas en este vídeo. Así que lo que hoy nos planteamos es, ¿realmente existe la supraconciencia cuántica? ¿Puede la mecánica cuántica explicar estas SMs? Pues be ready, porque Papi Santolaya te lo cuenta. El extracto del libro que sale al inicio no es el único donde hace afirmaciones dentro de mi campo de estudio, la física de partículas.
Electrones, quarks, gluones, bosones y gravitones. Pero, ¿qué hay más allá del quark? El fotón. Y el fotón es luz, es energía, así que, en última instancia, todo se reduce a la energía.
O sobre los bosones.
Bosones incluyen a los fotones, gluones y bosones W y Z. Estas partículas, que condicionaron la formación de masa en el universo, fueron descritas en 2010 por el físico británico Peter Higgs en el CERN. Por su origen a los bosones se los ha llamado las partículas de Dios.
La termodinámica.
Todo el universo tiende hacia la entropía.
La luz.
El láser produce una luz pura e intensa y proporciona el holograma de un objeto tridimensional. La conciencia cuántica universal es un holograma formado por las supraconciencias, de manera que cada una tiene las propiedades del todo.
Y muchísimas más que no cito por no caer en la repetición. Lo cierto es que a pesar de ser un libro sobre el cuerpo humano, la vida y la medicina, está plagado de referencias científicas, incluso con capítulos dedicados exclusivamente a la mecánica cuántica. Además, lanza mensajes muy altisonantes, y no solo en sus libros, por lo que mucha gente me ha escrito para que lo explique y a eso voy. Pero antes de empezar tengo que hacer un par de aclaraciones y contar alguna experiencia personal. Creo que es importante para dar contexto. Si se quieren saltar esta parte e ir directamente a la respuesta a las preguntas, le dejo por aquí el minuto para que puedan ir directamente. Aún así, les recomiendo que se queden para que entiendan todo el contexto. Yo llevo ya meses siguiendo el trabajo del Dr. Sanz, que me parece muy interesante. Especialmente lo he hecho en los últimos tiempos por motivo de este vídeo. He estado escuchando lo que dice en entrevistas, sus vídeos, el de sus canales y también sus libros. Y escucharlo ha despertado mi interés y admiración por su valentía, por su mensaje directo, sincero y honesto, pero en especial por su sentido de misión. Siento que todo esto lo hace porque tiene algo importante que contar a la sociedad y en especial a los jóvenes. Así, en sus entrevistas habla de cosas súper importantes como el sentido de la vida, el papel de la familia, de la realización personal, de la ayuda y cooperación entre nosotros, de la gratitud, del desprecio hacia lo material o del amor. Todo ello en un contexto en el que vivimos que yo creo que es preocupante. Esa crisis de sentido de vida que se aprecia en especial en los jóvenes, la pandemia de depresiones y suicidios de la sociedad moderna, así como sus posibles causas. Una sociedad excesivamente materialista, individualista, que, como dice él, abraza el ego y da espalda a la dimensión emocional del ser humano. Así creo que su éxito no es casual y responde a esto. Ha identificado un problema real de la sociedad y con un mensaje honesto, sincero y lleno de esperanza, muy bien relatado por cierto, ha tocado emocionalmente a muchas personas, a las que posiblemente ha inducido a un cambio positivo sobre su manera de entender la vida, el mundo y su relación con las personas. Y todo esto me viene muy bien porque son cosas que yo pienso demasiado tiempo, le doy muchas vueltas. Yo, sincerándome ante ustedes, en mis 40 ya, estoy en una fase de mi vida donde paso altibajos emocionales. En los momentos de caída, cuando los analizo, llego a conclusiones similares a las conclusiones que llega él. Estas pequeñas bajonas emocionales vienen por sentimientos de vacío, de que nada merece la pena, de falta de ilusión ante un mundo que no tiene nada que ofrecerme, cosas así. Mi forma de salir de estas bajadas emocionales, que por suerte son muy pocas, pasan por centrarme en los pilares que dan sentido a la vida, que yo creo que son fundamentalmente 5, según he analizado. Un sentimiento religioso o espiritual o de trascendencia, el sentimiento familiar o de trascendencia natural, el sentido de misión de vida o ayuda comunitaria en tu tejido social, la realización profesional para las personas que son muy ambiciosas, como yo, y finalmente el conocimiento, aprender, ser curioso y desarrollar la dimensión intelectual. Yo, que no tengo ese sentimiento religioso espiritual, me apoyo en los momentos bajos en las 4 otras vías que acabo de mencionar, pues ayudar a la gente que tienes alrededor, la familia, mi trabajo y aprender, conocer, estudiar. Y bueno, no es casualidad todo esto, porque mi proyecto, que estoy haciendo, el canal, los libros y mis conferencias, pues van en esta línea. Les incito a pensar, a que estudien, a que sean curiosos, a que aprendan, a que descubran, porque creo que esto también aporta en esta dirección, a dar sentido a la vida. Y esto lo he podido comprobar yo mismo. Una de las mayores sorpresas de mi trabajo, algo que nunca había imaginado, es que mis vídeos sirvieran de apoyo emocional a muchas personas. Es decir, no son pocas las personas que a lo largo de los años que llevo haciendo esto se han acercado, pues algunas muy emocionadas, por lo que ha aportado a sus vidas la dimensión intelectual. Es algo que he visto en otros y que también aprecio en mí mismo. La dimensión intelectual aporta mucho sentido a mi vida. Y por todo esto y mucho más, el trabajo del doctor me impacta, porque me identifico mucho con su misión vital y su mensaje, y me produce gran admiración. El doctor todo esto lo sabe, y se lo he dicho. Y es por esto por lo que no me he querido lanzar a opinar así sin más, sin saber. Me he pasado meses sopesando si hacer este vídeo o si no hacerlo y cómo hacerlo. Y al final, como pueden ver, me he decantado por el sí, hacerlo. Y principalmente lo hago por 2 razones que luego explico con más detenimiento. Primero, porque toca de forma muy directa mi ámbito de estudio y creo que, en resumen, que luego lo verán con más calma, genera un daño a mi trabajo y a todo mi ámbito de estudio, Todo esto, como digo, lo comentaré más al final. Y la segunda, que creo que es más importante porque confunde a la gente, y aunque sus motivos en